Okay, sorry about that. I'm just checking to see everything's okay. All right, why is that playing? That's not supposed to be playing. Okay, today we are going to start reading David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, one of my favorite books or one of my favorite stories. And as we go, uh, we will talk about any of the interesting things that we see. So, why don't we get started? And if you're watching this live with me, feel free to make questions in the comments section. Okay, so we have David Copperfield the Younger, Chapter 1, I Am Born. And then the famous first words of this book, which are, whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my life, of my own life, or whether the station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. Now we come to our first phrasal verb, which is turn out. Let me just write that up here. Turn out. Turn out is a phrasal verb which means like a surprise ending or an unknown ending. Let's see. Let's think of an example of when you would use turn out. So imagine you think it's going to rain and you go outside fully expecting rain, but in the end it never rained. Then you can say it turned out that there was no rain, meaning I was surprised. Originally I thought there would be rain. And that's one of the ways. There are many ways that you could use turn out, but that's one of the ways that you could use it. Surprise ending. So whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my life means it's possible I don't think that I will turn out to be the hero of my life, but I might be surprised and be the hero of my life. Okay. Let's see. Let's keep going here. Or whether that station, I'm just distracted because suddenly I see some messages here, and I still have never received messages doing a live broadcast, but I think those are old. Okay. They are, I think. Okay, well, it doesn't matter. What does matter? I would like to talk to that person, but I'm still not sure how to do this. I'll figure it out. Okay, so whether I shall surprise ending be the hero of my life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else. That word station, especially in Victorian England and maybe before, meant like position. I don't think people use it that way anymore. But so when he says whether that station will be held by anybody else, that means whether somebody else will hold that position. All right. So these pages must show. So these pages will tell us who's going to be the hero of my life. Surprise, me, or probably somebody else. To begin my life with the beginning of my life, I record that I was born, as I have been informed and believe, on a Friday at 12 at night. It was remarked that the clock began to strike and I began to cry simultaneously. So the clock striking, that's when, the old clocks, when they have like a bell, ding, ding, ding. So when you say the clock strikes 12, that means the clock started making noise, that it was 12 o'clock. There was like an alarm on the clock. And he's saying that he was told that happened, the ding, 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 ding of the midnight, of striking midnight. Strike means hit. And his cries began at the same time, simultaneously. Okay, well, let's keep going. In consideration of the day and hour of my birth, it was declared by the nurse and by some sage women in the neighborhood who had taken a lively interest in me several months before, that there was any possibility of our becoming personally acquainted. What? Wait. In consideration of the day and hour of my birth, it was declared by the nurse and by some sage women. Sage means wise or smart. So some wise women in the neighborhood who had taken a lively interest in me several months before there was any possibility of our becoming personally acquainted. So this is a very long way of saying that there were several women interested in him way before he was born, several months before he was born. First, so these were the things that they were saying about him, I guess, before he was born. Number one, they were saying that he was destined to be unlucky in life. His destiny was to be unlucky. He has no choice. He's going to lead a very unlucky life. And secondly, that I was privileged to see ghosts and spirits. So he would have this gift of being able to see the ghosts and the spirits, but he would also be cursed and never be lucky in life, have bad fortune in life. Both these gifts inevitably attaching, as they believed, to all unlucky infants of either gender born towards the small hours on a Friday night. So I guess that's a sign, a superstition, that if you're born very late on a Friday night, you will have a very unlucky life, but you will also be able to communicate or see ghosts and spirits. I say nothing here on the first head, because nothing can show better than my history whether that prediction was verified or falsified by the result. Victorians have a very funny way of talking. It's very complicated sometimes. So they say very complicated things when they mean very simple things. I need say nothing here on the first head. I'm not sure why he says on the first head. I'm not sure what that means. But he's going to say, I'm not going, maybe he means like on the first time I'm writing to you, something like that. Because he's saying, I'm not going to tell you now. I need say nothing here on the first head, right at the beginning, because nothing can show better than my history, whether that prediction was verified or falsified by the result. So he's saying you have to read the whole book in order to find out, in order to know if if I am unlucky. Okay, on the second branch of the question, I will only remark that unless I ran through the part of my inheritance while I was still a baby, I have not come into it yet. So his father passed away, and he's saying he still doesn't have any money. So obviously he's an adult now writing this, and he's saying, well, unless I spent all of that money when I was a baby, and I don't remember, I have never had any inheritance collected from my father. But I do not at all complain of having been kept out of this property, and if anybody else should be in the present enjoyment of it, he is heartily welcome to keep it. So he's saying, I'm not going to complain that I didn't receive any inheritance from my father, and if somebody is enjoying that inheritance right now, I'm happy for them. I was born with a caul. Okay, I have no idea what that is, a caul. Let's look into it. Let's see what it is. An amniotic membrane enclosing a fetus, a woman's close-fitting indoor headdress or hamlet. So how do you say that word? An amniotic membrane enclosing a fetus. So I was born with a caul in the newspapers at the low price of 15 guineas. I really don't know. A caul is also a woman's close-fitting indoor headdress. So maybe when he was born, they wrapped him, instead of in a blanket, in a cheap headdress for women, like a cheap hat. So he was born and put in a hat. That's what I'm guessing. which is advertised for sale in the newspapers at the low price of 15 guineas. So that's old English money. That's old Victorian money. I don't know how much that is. Whether seagoing people were short of money at that time, or were short of faith and preferred cork jackets, I don't know. All I know is that there was but one solitary bidding, and that was from an attorney connected with the bill-broking business, which offered £2 in cash and the balance in sherry, but declined to be guaranteed from drowning on any higher bargain. Oh, that's rather complicated. So let's see. Let's try to take. That's confusing for me, so I can imagine if you're trying to learn English how hard this could be. Whether seagoing people were short of money about that time, or were short of faith and preferred cork jackets, I don't know. What is a cork jacket, first of all? Cork jacket. Let's see. I've never heard this term before. But I guess, now let me show you a picture. I mean, when I look for cork jacket, I get something like this. I guess it's just a type of jacket. I don't know. I've never heard that before. So let's see. Whether seagoing people who use the sea, travel in the sea. So, for example, fishermen or sailors. Those are seagoing people. Whether seagoing people were short of money, they didn't have a lot of money at that time, or were short of faith and preferred cork jackets. I'm not really sure I understand that sentence very well. Let's see. I don't know. All I know is that there was but one solitary bidding, so one solitary offer, only one offer, and that was from an attorney connected with the bill-broking business. I wonder if bill-broking is like bill collecting. Let's see. I'm going to cheat again and look for the meaning here. Bill-broking. Meaning. Buys bills. Oh. Yeah, it's kind of like bill collecting, I would say. Maybe the 19th century version of bill collecting. Who offered £2 in cash and the balance in sherry. So they offered I'm not sure, offered for what? To buy what? I don't know. But some attorney offered £2 of cash and a quantity of sherry to buy something, but declined to be guaranteed from drowning on any higher bargain. I'm not really sure what that means, to be honest with you. Let's see. Consequently, the advertisement was withdrawn at a dead loss. For as to sherry, my poor dear mother's own sherry was in the market then, and 10 years afterwards, the call put up in the raffle down in our part of the country to 50 members and half a crown a head, the winner to spend 5 shillings. Have I missed something here? I was present with a call. I was born with a call, which was advertised for sale. Oh. I'm not sure what that word call is supposed to mean here. Let's see. Yeah, so a baby born with a caul is born with some kind of material over his face. It looks like a veil. Why would they sell that? Does it have some kind of magical power? I'm not sure. I was born with a caul, which was advertised for sale in the newspapers at the low price. So for some reason people would want to buy that. It's part of the mother. It's part of the sack that holds the baby when they're born. And sometimes babies are born with it over their face and it looks like kind of a veil. Whether seagoing people, oh, maybe that's why the seagoing people would be interested in it. Maybe it has some kind of value for fishing. But they weren't interested. Nobody wanted to buy it at the time, or were short of faith. So maybe it's a superstition for them to have it, and but they were short of faith, so they didn't. They decided not to buy the caul for whatever reason, but instead preferred to be practical and buy jackets. I don't know. All I know is that there was but one solitary bidding. So one person was interested in this caul, and that was from an attorney connected with the bill broking business, who offered. So he offered to buy this caul for £2 and some sherry, but declined to be guaranteed from drowning on any higher bargain. Declined to be guaranteed from drowning. So maybe having this caul is somehow it keeps you from drowning. It keeps you from going under the water. But he wouldn't pay more than that. Consequently, the advertisement was withdrawn at a dead loss. So the advertisement to sell this cost the mother money, and she didn't make any because she didn't sell it. For as to sherry, my poor dear mother's own sherry was in the market then. So the mother was selling her own sherry, which is a drink kind of like wine or something like that. So it seems like what he's indicating is that she was in a lot of financial trouble, and she was trying to sell whatever she could make money off of. So she was selling this caul. I don't know why anybody would want that. And but also she was selling her sherry, her expensive wine. Okay, let's see. And consequently, the advertisement was withdrawn at a dead last. For as to sherry, my poor dear mother's own sherry was in the market then. And 10 years afterwards, the caul was put up in a raffle. A raffle is a type of like a lottery. Let's see. Let's put that up here. I'm sorry. I'm still getting used to all of this. So hopefully I'll start getting... I hope I get better at this. If not, I better stop doing this. Because it's pretty bad the way I'm doing things. But oh well. A raffle is a type of lottery where each person buys a ticket. So maybe there are 500 tickets and you buy one for $1. So then later they pull out your number, you know, and out of the 500, maybe one person will win. So that's what a raffle is. It's kind of like a lottery. So they tried to sell this caul 10 years later in a raffle. So they said, okay, there are 500 tickets, each person pay $1, and then they took one of the tickets and that was the winner. Okay, half a crown a head. The winner to spend 5 shillings. I was present myself, and I remembered to have felt quite uncomfortable and confused at part of myself being disposed of in that way. So it really was like some piece that he was born with, and he was a little bit freaked out because people were bidding on it. They wanted to buy it. I wonder what they used that for. Okay, let's see. The caul was won, I recollect. Recollect is another way of saying I remember. So the caul was won, I remember, by an old lady with a handbasket, who very reluctantly produced from it the stipulated 5 shillings, all in halfpence and 2p and halfpenny short. Victorian money is very weird. It's very confusing. There's so many different kinds of Victorian money. I don't know what all of that means. They had a lot of different coins and things like that. as it took an immense time and a great waste of arithmetic to endeavor without any effect to prove to her. It is a fact which will long be remembered as remarkable down there, that she was never drowned, but died triumphantly in bed at 92. So this call, whatever it is, this part that comes out of the mother when you're born, I guess keeps you from drowning. Drowning is, if you go underwater, if you're submerged in water for a long time, you die. That's drowning. So somehow this call prevents you from drowning, or they believe it prevents you from drowning. So everybody was amazed. This woman never drowned. She died because she was an old woman. Okay. I have understood that it was, to the last, her proudest boast that she had never been on the water in her life, except upon a bridge. That word boast. You use this word boast when you're proud of something, when you want everyone to know how proud you are of something. Oh, look at this. I have this wonderful thing and you don't. So here in the book, where was it? I've understood that it was to her proudest boast that she had never been on water. So she was very proud that she had never been on water. I've never been on water, only on a bridge once. That's boasting. She's very proud of that. If you have a new car and you want everyone to see your new car, you say, look at my new car. You're boasting. Yep, this is the best car in the world. I'm so proud of it. That is boasting. So the woman proudly boasted that she had never been on water. That was something to be proud of for some reason. And that over her tea, to which she was extremely partial. Let's see. I have understood that it was, to the last, her proudest boast that she never had been on the water in her life, except upon a bridge, and that over her tea, to which she was extremely partial, she, to the last, expressed her indignation at the impiety of mariners and others who had the presumption to go meandering about the world. Oh my gosh, there's so much in here. All right, let's take a look at this. I've understood that it was, to the last, her proudest boast that she had never been on the water in her life except upon a bridge, and that over her tea, to which she was extremely partial, she to the last. So when they say over her tea, that means, while she's drinking her tea and having a social visit, while she's talking to people and she's, having the little ritual of tea, having a conversation, she would always tell people, I lost my place. To the last, meaning until she died, until the day she died. So every day when she would have her tea, she would tell people this. She would express her indignation. I gotta write that. Let's see. Express indignation. Okay. Indignation is when you get upset about something that you hear and you say, I can't believe that. So when she expresses her indignation, it means, these people, I can't believe these people. When you're indignant, you are not happy, maybe a little bit angry, and you feel like you have the right reason to be not happy or not angry. I'm right and you're wrong and I'm angry about it. That's indignation. She expressed her indignation. And then we have the word pious. Let's see. Let's put that up here. We've got pious. And then, whoops. Let me just make sure I'm spelling that right. For some reason that looks wrong to me. Pious, yeah. Okay. And then we have the word impiety, which comes from the word pious. So let's put that up here. Impiety. Okay. First, we have the word pious. Let's understand that, and then we can understand the word impiety. Pious is somebody. It's used a lot for religious things or religious beliefs. A pious person is somebody who follows all of the rules of the religion. So if you're a religious person, then a pious person is someone who you admire because they never do anything wrong. A pious person always follows the religious rules. An impious person is somebody who doesn't follow the religious rules. But we can use that outside of the context of religion, and we could say an impious person is a person who does bad things. So that's what impiety is. So let's see. She was very indignant at the impiety of mariners. Now that word mariner means sailors. You know, mare, that's a Latin word for sea. And so anything that you see with mare in it usually has something, if it comes from that root, usually has something to do with the sea or the ocean. And mariners are sailors. That's what it means. So the impiety of mariners. So she thinks that sailors are bad people. They're impious. They do bad things. And others who have the presumption to go meandering. This word presumption is a pretty interesting word. Let me just write it down here. I'm going to cut these up into little 1 or 2 minute videos later on. So I want to put these words up here to show the meaning. Now I'm just going to cheat and see what Google's definition is. I guess you could say that presumption is kind of like, I'm just going to use Google's words here, which are arrogant and disrespectful. But a lot of times in Victorian England, when somebody was presumptuous, it meant that they were trying to be higher or better than they were born into. So when she says that when she talks about the presumption of the sailors, her attitude is, who do they think they are, going to all of these different places? They have no right to do that. They're just regular people and they should be at home. That's where they should be. And it's presumptuous of them to think, well, I can travel the world. I can go to this place and that place. So that's what's meant by the presumption of these. And then we get to this funny word here, meandering. Let's put that up here, meander. Meandering is like going from place to place with no reason to do it. So if you're meandering somewhere, it just means you've got no goal. You're just walking from place to place and there's no purpose to it. It's kind of a negative word, mostly. I mean, I guess you could use it in a positive way, but I think that there are more positive ways to express that, like wander. I was wandering around. That sounds much more positive than I was meandering around, because when you say meander, the focus is on it's pointless. You had no goal. You had no purpose. Wander also means that, but it doesn't focus on it. Wander, I think, is more, the focus is on moving from place to place, whereas meander is the same thing, moving place to place, but the focus is on no goals or no purpose. So let's see. Let's go back to the sentence. She expressed her indignation, who do they think they are? At the impiety of mariners, at the evil way mariners think, sea people think. Meandering about the world, the presumption of meandering about the world, the arrogance of going around the world. Who do they think they are doing that? They should be staying home. Okay. It was in vain to represent to her that some conveniences, tea perhaps, included, included, oh, tea perhaps included, resulted from this objectionable practice. So here she is every day drinking her tea, telling everyone how horrible these seamen are who go from place to place. Who do they think they are doing that? While she's drinking her tea that came from China or India, and they're the ones who got it for her. But he's saying it was in vain. When something is in vain, oh, we better put that. Let's put that up here. When something is in vain, it means it's pointless. There's no reason for it. So if you say it is in vain to explain it to her, it would be in vain to ask her, well, where did you get your tea? It would be pointless. There would be no point to ask her, where did you get your tea? Because she's, some people you can't talk to. You can't reason with her. It's in vain to try to convince her. Okay, let's see. So let's go back. It was in vain to represent to her that some of these conveniences, perhaps tea included, resulted from this objectionable practice. And something is objectionable. You don't like it. Let's put that up here. This is probably a word. You could still use it now, but I think it's more common. Objectionable. It would have been more common back then to use this word, but when you object to something, you oppose it, you don't like it. And if you want to use object as an adjective, that means I don't like it. It's something that I disagree with. It's objectionable. And so this practice of going from country to country is objectionable to this woman. She doesn't like it. She doesn't approve of it. She doesn't agree with it. It's objectionable. Okay, she always returned with greater emphasis and with an instinctive knowledge of the strength of her objection. Let us have no meandering. Remember, meander means going from place to place with no purpose. And she says, I don't like that. We should stop that. People should stop doing that, going from place to place. Not to my, and this is funny. This is kind of clever. Then the narrator says, not to meander myself. You can use meander when you change the subject too quickly, or when you talk about something very different from the other topic. So if somebody is talking about the weather, nice weather we're having, but then it suddenly changes to, I like red cars. He is meandering from subject to subject. He's going from one place to another place there's no connection between the two. This is a type of meandering for talking. It's probably more common to use it in that context than in the physical sense of walking from place to place. So he says, not to meander myself, not to change the subject too quickly or to such a different thing. At present, I will go back to my birth. Oh, so he started talking about this lady. And then he's saying, oh, I'm meandering. I'm going off to a completely different direction because she's kind of an interesting character. But let's go back to the subject, which is my birth. So not to meander myself. At present, I will go back to my birth. So I'll return to the subject of my birth. I was born at Blunderstone in Suffolk, or thereby, as they say in Scotland. So maybe that means near? I don't know. I don't know what thereby meant in Victorian Scotland, but thereby now is when you're giving an explanation. So I'm not really sure. Thereby could mean near, I guess. I was a posthumous child. My father's eyes had closed upon the light of this world. Posthumous means after your death. So I guess the reason he's saying I was a posthumous child is because his father had died before he was born. My father's eyes had closed upon the light of this world 6 months when mine opened on it. So his father was already dead for 6 months when he was born. There is something strange to me, even now, in the reflection, that he never saw me, and something stranger yet, in the shadowy remembrance that I have of my first childish associations with his white gravestone in the churchyard, and the indefinable compassion I used to feel for it, lying out alone, there in the dark night, when our little parlor was warm and bright with a fire and candle, and the doors of our house were almost cruelly, it seemed to me sometimes, bolted and locked against it. Okay, well, at least it's not too complicated. A couple of things here. Let's see. I used to feel for it lying. Let's see. Let's start. I have my first childish associations with his white gravestone in the churchyard, and of the indefinable compassion I used to feel for it, lying out alone there in the dark night when our little parlor. Okay, parlor, it's not really used very much anymore unless you're talking about an older house, and the equivalent now, I guess, would be the living room. But parlor was a room in the front of the house where you would receive guests and talk. That word parlor is just the French word for talking, parler. So it's a room for visiting with people and talking with people. It's more of a formal room. But I guess the family would also sometimes sit there. Was warm when our little parlor was warm and bright with fire and candle, and the doors of our house were almost cruelly, it seemed to me sometimes, bolted and locked against it. So the windows were always locked and bolted. Let's just look for a picture of a bolt here. Maybe if we do it like this, bolted. A bolt is something kind of like this. Sort of it's a way to lock a door. I don't see any good pictures of bolts here. But what if I put bolted door? So here, this is what I'm kind of thinking of when I see the word bolt. I think of something like this. It's kind of a lock for a door. Okay. Let's go back. So the windows were always very well locked, which for some reason bothered him. I'm not sure why. Okay. An aunt of my father's, and consequently a great aunt of mine, of whom I shall have more to relate by and by, was principal magnate of our family. Miss Trotwood. She's one of my favorite characters in this book. An aunt of my father's, and consequently a great aunt of mine, of whom I shall have more to relate by and by. That word by and by is a way of saying later. It isn't used too much anymore, but you'll sometimes hear people saying that, and it just means later. So I will tell you about her later, is what he's saying. I shall have more to relate by and by, means I will tell you about her later. Was the principal magnate of our family. Now that word magna is a Greek word, which means, is it a Latin word? Now I have to check. I think it's a Greek word. Let me check my word origin dictionary. That might seem weird that I like to check the word origin dictionary all the time because it's so helpful to know the origin of a word. I don't know which language. Wait, I can't talk and type at the same time. Word origin dictionary. Here we go. Magna. I think it's Greek. But let's see. Magna. Oh, let's see. Oh, Latin. It is Latin. It's not Greek. It's Latin. Magnus means big or great. So a magnate, not magnet. That's a different thing. That's, something that sticks to metal. Not a magnet. Magnate is a great person, a big person. So the principal magnate, where was it? Of our family. So like the greatest figure in our family, the biggest person in our family was his aunt, his father's aunt. Miss Trotwood, or Miss Betsy, as my poor mother always called her. He says poor here. And maybe you know this and maybe you don't, so I'll just explain it anyway in case you don't know it. But sometimes when you feel bad for someone, when you feel like bad things are happening to them, a lot of bad luck or things like that, you'll call them poor. So when he says my poor mother, we already get a sense that he feels bad for his mother, or bad things are going to happen to her. Not that she's poor financially. She is, I guess, kind of poor financially or something. No, she can't. I mean, I already know the story, so I guess she wasn't exactly poor. It's more about her fortune, her luck. When he says my poor mother, we already know bad things are going to happen to his mother because he says that. As my poor mother always called her, when she sufficiently overcame her dread of the formidable personage to mention her at all. Okay, to overcome. That's something we have to talk about here. To overcome something. You probably won't remember these words all at once, but these are pretty common things that we still use. So it will appear again and again, and then eventually you'll come to remember it after you encounter it many times. And to overcome something means to survive something or to win over something. So if you have a challenge and you overcome it, you are the winner of that challenge. You become the winner of that. So for example, if somebody overcomes cancer, that means they don't have cancer anymore, that they're okay now, that they're cured. Or if you overcome a difficult period in your life, it means that the difficult period is finished and you won. You're the winner of this. So overcome means like winning over something bad, being the winner over something bad. So here he's talking about his mother had to overcome her dread. Dread is like a feeling of being scared. Let's see. Or having bad feelings about something. So if I say, for example, I dread Mondays, that means when Monday comes, I get this horrible feeling. Oh no, Monday. I hate Mondays. I dread Mondays. I feel so bad and so scared and nervous on Mondays. That's what dread means. It's a very useful word, I think. When you dread something, you're kind of afraid of it. It makes you feel nervous. Well, here, his mother dreads the aunt. He dreads Miss Betsy. He dreads Miss Trotwood. So whenever Miss Trotwood is coming, she gets this feeling, oh no, Do you ever get that feeling when you're talking to certain people, or when you know you're going to be seeing certain people? You get that feeling of dread, that nervous feeling in your stomach, like you feel sick, like you're going to throw up. But so he's saying when his mother overcame her dread of the aunt, so she would have this period every time that she would meet the aunt of, but eventually she would become more relaxed. She would overcome the dread of this formidable person. Formidable means difficult to fight, scary, intimidating, something like that. That's formidable. To mention her at all, which was seldom. So even his mother, when she became brave enough to even mention her name, wasn't even being around her, just mentioning her name was too scary for her to do. So she almost never did it. Had been married to a husband younger than herself, who was very handsome, except in the sense of the homely adage, handsome is that handsome does. So, let's see here. So Miss Trotwood had been married to a younger man who was very handsome, except he wasn't very handsome because there's this old saying, adage. An adage is like an expression that people like to repeat because it's true, and that adage is handsome is that handsome does, meaning it's not important what your face looks like, it's important on how you behave. For he was strongly suspected of having beaten Miss Betsy, made some hasty but determined arrangements to throw her out of a 2 pair of stairs window. Okay, I'm going to have to read that again. But before I do, whoops, what did I just do? Let me get rid of that. Okay. I want to talk about this word hasty. This is a good word. If you don't already know it, it's a useful word. Hasty. Okay, hasty means that you do something quickly, but you're more concerned about the time than you are about the quality of something. So when you do something in a hasty way, it's usually not very good, because your biggest concern, the thing you're worried about the most, is time and not quality. So if you hastily write something, whatever you're writing isn't going to be very good. Yes, you'll get it, you'll finish it quickly, but the quality will be bad. The quality, the way it looks, or the content, what you're saying will not be good. So what did they do here that was hasty? Let's see. He was strongly suspected of having beaten Miss Betsy, and even of having once, on a disputed question of supplies, made some hasty but determined arrangements to throw her out of a 2 pair of stairs window. Okay. He made some hasty but determined arrangements. So he wasn't thinking, and he was going to grab her. And if I'm reading this correctly, this is very strangely written, but throw her out of like maybe a 2nd story window, a 2nd floor window. I think that's what the 2 pair of stairs window means. That you go up one and then you go up another, and then you're on the 2nd floor. And he wasn't thinking. He was just caught in the moment, hasty. He was going to throw her out the window. That's how bad her relationship was. Okay, these evidences of an incompatibility of temper induced Miss Betsy to pay him off. Oh, okay, now we have an interesting phrasal verb here, which is to pay someone off. Pay someone off. And this means to pay someone to make them go away. So, for example, in some countries, you can pay off the police. You know, if they catch you doing something wrong, you give them some money and they don't arrest you. They go away. That would be paying off the police. So paying someone off is to pay them money to keep them quiet or to make them go away. You can also pay off people to make them shut up. So if somebody sees you do a crime or a bad thing, and they say, I'm calling the police. You say, no, here's some money. Shut up. You didn't see anything. That's paying someone off. And sometimes you can pay a judge off. You give them money and then they make a decision for you in your favor, not because they're being fair. So that's pay off. Here, it says, how do they use pay off here? The evidences of the incompatibility of temper induced Miss Betsy to pay him off. And what that sounds like is she said, here, take this money and go. Leave me alone. I never want to see you again. And it worked. He left. And effect a separation by mutual consent. So mutual consent, that means they both agreed. So to effect a separation, cause a separation by mutual consent. They both said, okay. And that was the end of it. He went to India with his capital, with his money. And there, according to a wild legend in our family, was once seen riding on an elephant in company with a baboon. But I think it must have been a baboo or a begum. Anyhow, from India, tidings of his death reached home. So tidings is like news. News of his death reached home within 10 years. How they affected my aunt, nobody knew, for immediately upon the separation, she took her maiden name, bought a cottage in a hamlet. A hamlet's like a little town, a small town, on the sea coast, a long way off, established herself there as a single woman with one servant, and was understood to live secluded, even afterwards, in an inflexible retirement. So after she paid off her husband to go away, she bought a little house in a small town by the sea, and she stays secluded. That means she doesn't talk to anybody. She stays at home. She minds her own business. And it says inflexible, so she's always like that. She never changes. My father had once been a favorite of hers, I believe, but she was mortally affronted by his marriage on the ground that my mother was a wax doll. So, morally affronted, affronted is not really a very common word anymore. I don't even know if it was back then, but it means like offended. So she was mortally offended. Mortal means it's something that could kill you. So the offense was so strong, she died inside. By his marriage, on the ground, for the reason that my mother was a wax doll. I'm not sure what's meant by that. Maybe that she's like superficially beautiful and she has no substance. Maybe something like that. I'm not sure what they mean by wax doll. She had never seen my mother, but she knew her to be not yet 20. So, she was offended because the mother was so young when she got married. My father and Miss Betsy never met again. He was double my mother's age when he married. Oh, so the husband, the father, was 40 and she was 20. So Aunt Betsy didn't like that. She was very offended by that. And of but a delicate constitution. That phrase, a delicate constitution, means that he was very sensitive. He had pretty bad health. He died a year afterwards, and, as I've said, 6 months before I came into the world. This was the state of matters on the afternoon of what I may be excused for calling that eventful and important Friday. So this was the state of matters. This was the situation on that afternoon of what I may be excused for calling, which like that kind of means I'm sure you would agree, that eventful and important Friday, that very important Friday that I was born. I can make no claim, therefore, to have known at that time how matters stood, or to have any remembrance founded upon the evidence of my own senses of what follows. I can make no. That's complicated. This is pretty complicated language. I can make no claim, therefore, to have known at that time how matters stood. So he's saying, how could I know as a baby what the situation I was born into was, or to have any remembrance founded upon the evidence of my own senses of what follows. So obviously he can't remember what happened. He was just a baby. But he's heard this story, so he's telling it through the words of other people. My mother was sitting by the fire, but poorly in health, and very low in spirits. To be low in spirits means to be very sad, very depressed. Looking at it through her tears, and desponding heavily about herself, and the fatherless little stranger who was already welcomed by some grossness of prophetic pins, by some grossness. What is that? I've never seen that word before. Grossness. Grossness. Well, Google doesn't even say it's a word. Let's look at that again. By some grossness of prophetic pins in a drawer. By some grosses. Okay, my mother was sitting by the fire, but poorly in health and very low in spirits, very depressed, looking at it through her tears and desponding heavily about herself and the fatherless little stranger who was already welcomed by some grossness of prophetic pins. By some, well, okay, one of the ways that gross could be used is a set of 144. I think that would only be used like if you're in business, like baking or something. A dozen is 12, and 144 is 12 times 12. So if you're making or baking a lot of things, you might use this plural of grosses, meaning two or more sets of 144. That's pretty confusing. But I say that because it says grosses of pins. So maybe there's a box with hundreds of pins in it, and he calls them prophetic pins. Prophecy, maybe we better put that up here. Prophecy. Prophecy is when people predict the future. A person who predicts the future is called a prophet. So prophetic pins means pins telling the future. So I guess you could imagine these old ladies he was talking about before throwing the pins and then interpreting the position of the pins. And that's why he's calling them prophetic pins, I guess. I don't know. But grosses of prophetic pins, hundreds of pins thrown on the table in a certain way to interpret the future. That's my guess. I don't know. To a world not at all excited on the subject of his arrival. So nobody was happy that he was being born. The mother was very sad and depressed because she was alone. The aunt didn't like the mother, so she was very alone. My mother, I say, was sitting by the fire that bright, windy March afternoon, very timid and sad, and very doubtful of ever coming alive out of the trial that was before her. When lifting her eyes as she dried them to the window opposite, she saw a strange lady coming up the garden. So there she is, sitting in the parlor, and she looks out the window, and there's that strange lady coming to the door. My mother had a sure foreboding at the second glance that it was Miss Betsy. The setting sun was glowing on the strange lady over the garden fence, and she came walking up to the door with a fell rigidity of figure and composure of countenance that could have belonged to nobody else. So rigidity means doesn't move. She's a very stiff person. And countenance is the expression on your face. So she had a countenance on her face that you could imagine that stiff woman. She's very serious, not very happy. And composure is how you are standing or how you're carrying yourself. This is composure. So you have it's a rigid composure. And the countenance, he doesn't say composure of countenance. Well, he's talking about the face, the position of the face that could belong to nobody else. It had to be her. Very serious, angry woman. She's not really. When she reached the house, she gave another proof of her identity. My father had often hinted that she seldom conducted herself like any ordinary Christian. And now, instead of ringing the bell, she came and looked in at the identical window, pressing the end of her nose against the glass to the extent that my poor dear mother used to say it became perfectly flat and white in the moment. So instead of ringing the doorbell, she went to the window of the parlor and looked in, and it pressed up against her nose. She gave my mother such a turn that I've always been convinced that I am indebted to Miss Betsy for having been born on a Friday. So if you say I'm indebted, let's put that. Maybe you could recognize the word debt in there. Debt is something that you owe. Usually you talk about debt when you're talking about money. But here, maybe you could owe a person something, right? So if you say, I am indebted to you, it means I owe you something. Maybe not money. Maybe a kindness. Maybe somebody did something for you and you're very grateful. It's another way of saying grateful. I'm indebted to you. I owe you something. And here he says that she gave my mother such a turn, maybe we could say such a shock, such a surprise, that I've always been convinced that I owe, that I'm grateful to Miss Betsy. I owe her something for having been on a Friday. So her face scared the mother so much. That's probably why he was born then, because she was physically shocked so much that it caused him to be born at that moment. So he's saying, I'm indebted to her. I owe her something. It's because of her that I was born on that Friday. My mother had left her chair in her agitation and gone behind it in the corner. So it sounds like she was hiding. Miss Betsy, looking round the room slowly and inquiringly, began on the other side, and carried her eyes on like Saracen's head in a Dutch clock until they reached my mother. Okay, so we've got the word. I think the only important word that we can talk about here is inquiringly. She looked inquiringly. She looked inquiringly. Inquiringly. Let's put that up here. She looked inquiringly. Oops, and I misspelled it. Oh well, you can see well, I better change it. I don't want that up there. I have to cut these up later into separate videos, and I don't want that to show up. She looked inquiringly. Okay. All right. So I don't know if you've ever seen that word inquire before, but it is like a formal way of saying making a question or asking. So you can say, can I ask? Or you can say, can I inquire? It's a much more formal way of saying ask, uh, which is still used. But so to look inquiringly means to have like a question on your face. Like, you can see the curiosity or the question in her face. That's looking inquiringly. She looked inquiringly. She had a question on her face. So uh, let's see. My mother had left her chair in agitation and gone behind it in the corner. Miss Betsy looking around the room. So remember, she's outside, looking through the window, and the mother's hiding. She doesn't want to see her. And Miss Betsy is looking around inquiringly. What is that? That's inquiringly. And began on the other side and carried her eyes on, like Saracen's head in a Dutch clock, until they reached my mother. So eventually, what does this Saracen's head on a Dutch clock mean? Well, if I Google that, I don't get it. I get pictures of pubs. Oh well, I just imagine it's kind of like there are no pictures. I can't find any pictures, but I just imagine it's kind of like a figure, like a statue on a clock, and maybe the eyes move. I don't know. Okay. You read these things to yourself and you don't think about half of these things, but then suddenly when you have to explain it to other people, it's a completely different situation. Okay, so let's see. Then she made a frown and gestured to my mother like one who is accustomed to be obeyed, to come and open the door. And my mother went. So you could picture her in the window. Open the door. Go open the door. Uh-oh. Looks like she's in trouble. The mother. Okay, Mrs. David Copperfield. Mrs. David Copperfield, I think, said Miss Betsy, the emphasis referring perhaps to my mother's morning weeds and her condition. Mourning, Mourning. Oh, we better put that word up here. Mourning. Mourning, when somebody dies, you feel a period of sadness, and that could last a week, it could last a month, it could last half a year, it could last longer. So there's a period where maybe you don't want people to bother you. In the old days, they used to wear all black and maybe put something on their door to show, like, don't bother me. I'm mourning. I'm feeling bad because somebody died and I want to be alone. So the mourning period is the period that you remember that person and you feel very sad that they're gone. And sometimes that lasts a week, sometimes a month, sometimes it could last the rest of your life. That's a period of mourning. It says mourning weeds. I'm not sure what that is. Why are they just dead flowers? I'm just Googling mourning weeds just to see if there's anything. When I Google mourning weeds, I get the outfit that a mourner might wear. Let me show you pictures. So maybe that's what they used to call the outfits that women would wear when they're mourning, when they're feeling sad that someone died. So her husband died 6 months ago, but she's still dressing in a way that shows that she's sad that her husband is gone. Okay. I guess that's what it means. I don't know. Okay, yes, said my mother, faintly. Miss Trotwood, said the visitor. You've heard of her, I dare say. My mother answered she had that pleasure, and she had a disagreeable consciousness of not appearing to imply that it had been an overpowering pleasure. Okay, so that's a complicated sentence. My mother answered that she had had that pleasure. Yes, she had heard of Miss Betsy Trotwood before, and she had a disagreeable consciousness of not appearing to imply. Okay, so disagreeable means I don't like it or it's unpleasant. When you say that something is disagreeable, it's used a lot in Victorian speak, not so much now, but you could still use it. It means I don't like it. It's not nice. And she had the disagree. So she was acting not very nice. She wasn't trying to act friendly. The mother wasn't trying to be friendly. To imply, so she had the disagreeable consciousness of not appearing, not trying to look happy. She wasn't. She didn't say, "Oh yes, I've heard of you." She said, "Yeah, I've heard of you. I know who you are." This is what is meant by all of that. It was not an overpowering pleasure for her to meet Miss Betsy Trotwood. Okay. Now you see her, said Miss Betsy. My mother bent her head and begged her to walk in. Please, come in. They went into the parlor my mother had come from. The fire in the best room on the other side of the passage not being lighted, not having been lighted indeed since my father's funeral, and when they were both seated and Miss Betsy said nothing, my mother very vainly, trying to restrain herself, began to cry. So actually there's a better room than the parlor. So the parlor was maybe the common room where they spent every day, and there was a much nicer room on the other side of the hall, but they haven't used that room since the father died. So they're in this other room, the parlor. And then it says my mother vainly tried to not cry. So remember, vain, when you do something in vain, it's no use. It's no good. It doesn't work. So she's trying in vain not to cry. She's trying not to cry, but it's not working. She's crying. She's crying a lot. And then Miss Betsy says, oh, tut, tut, tut. That's kind of like, oh, stop it. Knock it off. Said Miss Betsy in a hurry. Don't do that. Come, come. My mother couldn't help it, notwithstanding. So she cried until she had her cry out. Okay, well, that word notwithstanding, it's kind of a word that only lawyers use. Normal people don't really talk like that these days. But my mother couldn't help it, notwithstanding. So even after even after Miss Betsy told her to stop, she still did it. So she cried until she had her cry out. So to cry out. To cry out. And you have to be careful with these phrasal verbs because they almost always mean 2 or 3 or 4 different things. So just, if I tell you what cry out means here, it doesn't mean that that's the only thing that you can use it for. It could mean other things too. But to have a cry out or to be cried out is to cry until you can't cry anymore. I'm all cried out. I can't cry anymore. There's no more crying left inside of me. That's what's meant here. That she cried until there was nothing left to cry. There were no more tears. It was impossible for her to cry anymore, even if she wanted to. Okay. Take off your cap, child, said Miss Betsy, and let me see you. My mother was too much afraid of her to refuse compliance. With this odd request, odd is another word for strange, with this strange request, with this odd request, if she had any disposition to do so. Therefore, she did as she was told, and she did it with such nervous hands that her hair, which was luxuriant and beautiful, fell all about her face. So when she took off her cap, her hair fell down all about her face, all over her face. "Why, bless my heart," exclaimed Miss Betsy, "you are a very baby." So Miss Betsy is freaked out because she looks so young. The mother looks so young. "My mother was, no doubt, unusually youthful in appearance. Even for her years, she hung her head as it were her fault." So she hung her head. Hanging your head is like this. So if you're ashamed or you feel bad or embarrassed about something, maybe you hang your head. So when the aunt said, "Oh, you're just a baby," that embarrassed her, and she kind of looked away as if it were her fault, like she could prevent that observation. "My mother was, no doubt, unusually youthful in appearance. Even for her years, she hung her head as if it were her fault." So she was embarrassed by that. "Poor thing," and said, sobbing, that indeed she was afraid. The wording here is a little bit difficult. Okay, so "my mother was, no doubt, unusually youthful in appearance. She was very young looking, and she was embarrassed by the comment that the aunt called her a baby, as if it were her fault. Poor thing," and said, sobbing. Okay, so that poor thing, that's David Copperfield telling the story, feeling sorry for his mother. Poor thing. Oh, my poor mother. "And she said," her mother said, sobbing. Sobbing is another word for crying. It's like strong crying, like "that indeed she was afraid she was but a childish widow." So then, she said, after the aunt made that comment, she said, "Oh, you're right, I'm just a baby, what am I doing?" Something like that. So she was agreeing with the aunt. "And would be but a childish mother if she..." I can't read that word. If she something. I don't know what that word is. I'm not sure. If she lived? Maybe that's if she lived. So she's saying, "Yeah, I'm so young. I shouldn't be having a baby. I'm going to be a horrible mother if I live." In the short pause which ensued, she had a fancy that she felt Miss Betsy touch her hair. So suddenly you can see that, oh, maybe Miss Betsy is a sympathetic person. She kind of lightly touched her hair as she was crying, but she wasn't sure. She had a fancy that she felt it, meaning she imagined that she felt it. Maybe Miss Betsy actually did, but she doesn't know because she wasn't looking. She wasn't paying attention, but she thought maybe Miss Betsy touched her. "And with no ungentle hand." Okay, so it wasn't like this, it was harder. "But looking at her, in her timid hope, she found that lady sitting with the skirt of her dress tucked up, her hands folded, one knee and her feet upon the fender, frowning at the fire." Let's see. "But looking at her in her timid hope, she found that lady..." So she thought, did she touch me? And she looked up, and what she saw was that woman sitting next to the fire, frowning, looking into the fire and frowning. "In the name of heaven," said Miss Betsy suddenly, "why rookery?" So rookery is a place where you keep birds, and that's the name of the house where they are. Why rookery? So she's not even thinking about the poor mother, soon to be mother, and how bad she feels about being so young and alone. She's more worried about why is the name of the house Rookery? Why? So I really like this character. "Do you mean the house, ma'am?" my mother asked. "Why rookery?" said Miss Betsy. "Cookery would have been more to the purpose if you had any practical ideas of life, either of you." So She's criticizing, why did you name this house Rookery? The name was Mr. Copperfield's choice, returned my mother. When he bought the house, he liked to think that there were rooks about it, that there were birds living there. The evening wind made such a disturbance just now among some tall old elm trees at the bottom of the garden that neither my mother nor Miss Betsy could forbear glancing that way. Evening wind made such a disturbance now among some of the tall old elm trees at the bottom that so to forbear something is to tolerate something. So if you forbear something, it's you do it even though you don't want to do it. And so the trees and the wind outside were making a horrible noise, and it was so horrible and so scary that neither of them could look in that direction. They were too scared. As the elms bent to one another like giants who were whispering secrets, and after a few seconds of such repose, fell into a violent flurry. A flurry is when things are moving all around, so you can imagine it's a very strong wind, and all of the trees and leaves are going up against each other, their wild arms about, as if their late confidences were really too wicked for their peace of mind. Some weather-beaten, ragged old rook's nest, burdening their higher branches, swung like wrecks upon a stormy sea. Okay, there's a lot in there. Why don't we just say it was kind of crazy watching all the branches move. I mean, there are a lot of words in there that you probably don't know, but a lot of them, yeah, it's not really that important. They're not words that you would probably use very much. There's so many words in here that it's going to take forever, and I think that we have to focus on the words that could be of use to in a practical way. And some of these just aren't that practical. Okay. Where are the birds? Asked Miss Betsy. Where are the birds? My mother had been thinking of something else. The rooks. What has become of them? Asked Miss Betsy. There have not been any since we've lived here, said my mother. We thought, Mr. Copperfield thought, it was quite a large rookery, but the nests were very old ones, and the birds have deserted them a long while ago. So there were birds' nests when they bought the house, and that's why he named it the Rookery. He was hoping there would be a lot of these birds here, but they were old nests, and the birds had abandoned them. David Copperfield all over, cried Miss Betsy. David Copperfield from head to foot, calls a house a rookery when there's not a rook near it, and takes the birds on trust because he sees the nests. So she's criticizing her nephew, saying that's just like him to call something the rookery just because he thinks there might be some, but he's never seen any. Mr. Copperfield, returned my mother, is dead, and if you dare speak unkindly of him to me... My poor dear mother, I suppose, had some momentary intention of committing an assault and battery upon my aunt. So that's a fancy way of saying assault is when you attack someone physically, and battery is when you hit them physically. So he's saying my poor dear mother, I suppose, had some momentary intention of committing an assault and battery on my aunt, who could easily have settled her with one hand. So he's saying the aunt could have, with one hand, just finished her if she wanted. Even if my mother had been in far better training for such an encounter than she was that evening. But it passed with the action of rising from her chair, and she sat down again very meekly and fainted. To be meek is to be gentle, to be weak, to be shy. It's kind of like a combination of weak and shy and gentle. A meek person is like this. So she sat very meekly and fainted. So first she said, "Don't talk about my dead husband like that," and then she got back into her senses and sat down and fainted. She lost consciousness. When she came to herself, or when Miss Betsy had restored her, whichever it was, she found the latter standing at the window. So when the mother fainted, she went to sleep temporarily. She lost consciousness, and when she opened her eyes again, she saw Miss Betsy standing at the window. The twilight was by this time shading down into darkness, and dimly as they saw each other, they could not have done that without the aid of the fire. The twilight is the period when the sun goes down. Twi means two, and light means light. Twilight is when you can see the moon and the sun, when you have both lights, when it's getting dark. Let's see. That's kind of a confusing sentence. The twilight was by this time shading down into the darkness. So it was going from light to dark. And dimly, dim is a word that means not very much light. And dimly, as they saw each other, they could not have done that without the aid of a fire. So it was getting so dark that the only reason that they could see each other was because of the fire in the room, and not because of the sun or the moon outside. It was getting too dark. "Well," said Miss Betsy, coming back to her chair as if she had only been taking a casual look at the prospect. "And when do you expect?" So she's saying, when is your baby coming? That's what you say to a pregnant woman. When are you expecting? Maybe we should write that. I guess that's kind of... When are you expecting? This is typically the way that you would ask a woman, when is she expecting her baby? You would just say, "When are you expecting?" So that's all that means. So anything else I don't think would sound like, "When do you plan to have the baby?" or "When is the baby coming?" You would never say that. What you would say is, "When are you expecting?" This language is a little bit different because it was written 150 years ago. So instead of "When are you expecting?" it's "When do you expect?" I don't know. Maybe in the UK they still talk like that, but I've never noticed it before. Okay, and then says, "I am all in a tremble." Trembling is shaking movement, right? Like this. This is trembling. So I guess what that means, "I'm all in a tremble," is I'm shocked, I can't believe it, or I'm very surprised, or I'm very nervous. Let's see. "I'm all in a tremble," faltered my mother. "I don't know what's the matter. I shall die, I'm sure." So she's just talking about how she feels right now. "I'm all in a tremble. I don't know what's the matter." So she's feeling very strange. "I don't know what's the matter. I shall die, I'm sure." She thinks she's dying. "No, no, no," said Miss Betsy. "Have some tea." "Oh dear, dear me, do you think it will do me any good?" cried my mother, in a helpless manner. "Of course it will," said Miss Betsy. "It's nothing but fancy. What do you call your girl?" Okay, so this word fancy could mean a lot of things, but one thing that fancy could mean is like fantasy. So when she says it's nothing but fancy, it means it's nothing but fantasy. It's nothing but your imagination. The trembling, the feeling sick. When she says, "I don't know what's in," she says, "Oh, it's nothing but fancy. It's nothing but your imagination." "Of course it will," said Miss Betsy. "It's nothing but fancy. What do you call your girl?" So she wants to call the servant in to bring tea. "I don't know that it will be a girl yet, ma'am," said my mother. "Bless the baby!" exclaimed Miss Betsy, unconsciously quoting the second sentiment of the pincushion in the drawer upstairs, but applying it to my mother instead of me. "I don't mean that. I mean your servant girl." That's funny, because I thought she meant servant girl, but the mother was confused. Wait a minute. So let's go back over this. Bless the baby, exclaimed Miss Betsy, unconsciously quoting the second sentiment of the pincushion in the drawer upstairs. Okay, a pincushion is this. Let me find a pincushion. This is a pincushion. So I think what he's saying here, which is kind of funny to me, is why I'm laughing, is that maybe the pincushion has this written on it. It says, bless the baby, like somebody stitched that in there as a nice little thing to put on a pincushion. And so, bless the baby. What she's saying is, sometimes when people are, especially women, I don't think men say this very much. It's mostly women who would say this, even now. A woman might say, "Oh, bless," or "Oh, bless it," or in this case, "Bless the baby," because the aunt always calls the mother a baby. Sometimes people will say, "Bless you," like when you sneeze. But you can also say it when you feel sorry for someone. But men don't really do that. I think I've only seen women doing that. I've never said it myself, but when I'm thinking about it, I've only seen women using that phrase. Oh, bless, or bless you. And you say it when you feel bad for someone. And here she's saying, bless the baby, because she's like, oh, you're misunderstanding me. You don't know what I'm talking about. She feels sorry for her because she doesn't understand what she meant. Exclaimed Mrs. Betsy, unconsciously quoting the second sentiment of the pincushion in the drawer. So apparently there's a pincushion upstairs. Miss Betsy doesn't know about it. It's just some kind of useless information. It's kind of funny that he puts it in there. So there's a pincushion in a drawer upstairs. Probably the same pincushion or the same pins he mentioned earlier that were prophetic. And on that pincushion, it must say two things, and one of them is bless the baby. But Miss Betsy didn't know that. It's just kind of a funny side comment. But applying it to my mother instead of me, I don't mean that. I mean your servant girl. Okay, and now we get to Peggotty. Peggotty, said my mother. Peggotty? Repeated Miss Betsy with some indignation. Remember, indignation means I can't believe it. You're kind of angry or upset about something because you can't believe it. Peggotty? Like what? What kind of name is Peggotty? So Peggotty, repeated Miss Betsy with some indignation. Peggotty? Do you mean to say a child that any human being has gone into a Christian church and gotten herself named Peggotty? It's her surname. That means it's her last name. It's not her first name. It's her last name, said my mother faintly. Miss Copperfield called her by it because her Christian name was the same as mine. Her first name was the same as mine. Here, Peggotty, cried Miss Betsy, opening the parlor door. Tea, your mistress is a little unwell. Don't dawdle. Dawdle means don't take your time. Don't be casual about it. Maybe we'll put that up here. So if you say dawdle, don't dawdle, that means don't take your time, don't be slow, hurry up. It's kind of a negative way of saying hurry up. It means don't be slow, don't dawdle. So your mistress is a little unwell. Don't dawdle, don't take your time, hurry up. Having issued this mandate with as much potentiality as if she had been a recognized authority in the house ever since it had been a house, that's a little strange because this woman who's never been to that house before is ordering the servants around. And having looked out to confront the amazed Peggotty coming along with the passage with a candle at the sound of a strange voice, Miss Betsy shut the door again and sat down as before, with her feet on the fender, the skirt of her dress tucked up, and her hands folded on one knee. "You were speaking about its being a girl," said Miss Betsy. "I have no doubt it will be a girl. I have a presentiment that it must be a girl." Presentiment. Well, that's not a modern word. I don't think that's something that people would use, but let's see. I'm just curious what Google has to say about that word. I mean, I guess it means like a prediction, but I've never heard that word before. An intuitive feeling, a presentiment. I wouldn't advise you to go around using that. I've never heard anybody use that word before. I have a presentiment that it must be a girl. I have a feeling, an intuition that it must be a girl. I think most people would say, I have a feeling it's a girl. "Now, child, from the moment of birth of this girl," "Perhaps boy," my mother took the liberty of putting in. "I tell you, I have a presentiment that it must be a girl," returned Miss Betsy. "Don't contradict." "From the moment of this girl's birth, child, I intend to be her friend. I intend to be her godmother. I beg you'll call her Betsy Trotwood Copperfield." In case you don't know, a godmother is kind of like a second mother. And, it would be the person who, if something happened to the mother, it would be the responsibility of the godmother to raise the child. So, but other than that, I think they would just pay special attention to that child as they're growing up and give them special things or treat them as a mother would. "And I beg you'll call her Betsy Trotwood Copperfield." So she wants her to name the daughter, the baby girl, Betsy Trotwood Copperfield. "There must be no mistakes in life with this Betsy Trotwood. There must be no trifling with her affections, poor dear. She must be well brought up and well guarded from reposing any foolish confidences where they are not deserved. I must make that my care." So she's saying, I'm going to make sure she's not disappointed in life. There was a twitch of Miss Betsy's head. A twitch is like a fast movement. Twitch, twitch, twitch. There was a twitch of Miss Betsy's head after each of these sentences. Or maybe like this, like agreeing. As if her own old wrongs were working within her, and she repressed any plainer reference to them by strong constraint. Oh boy, that's pretty complicated. Let's see. There was a twitch of Miss Betsy's head. Oh! There was a twitch of Miss Betsy's head. So she said it like this. She said, "There must be no trifling with her affections, poor dear." Like, yes, I'm going to make sure. She must be well brought up. Yes, I'm going to make sure. And well guarded. Yes, I'm going to make sure. That's what he means. There was a twitch of Miss Betsy's head after each of these sentences, as if her own old wrongs were working within her, and she repressed any plainer reference to them by strong constraint. So she wants these things for this girl who's being born because those bad things happened to her, and she wants to protect her and make sure they don't happen to her niece. So my mother suspected, at least, as she observed her by the low glimmer of the fire. Too much scared by Miss Betsy, too uneasy in herself, and too subdued and bewildered altogether to observe anything very clearly, or to know what to say, too scared by Miss Betsy, too uneasy in herself, too subdued. Too subdued. To subdue something means to restrain it, to stop it from moving, to make it go quiet, to make it softer. So when she says that she was subdued by Miss Betsy, it means, Miss Betsy is there, present with her, and it's making her not act, too subdued. So Miss Betsy is a powerful person, and it's making the mother keep from acting, keep from talking, or keep from moving. She's subdued by Miss Betsy. And she's bewildered. Bewildered. That's a good one. Bewildered. Bewildered. Okay. Bewildered means confused. I don't know what to do. When you're bewildered, you don't know what action to take. And so the mother was, Miss Betsy was, she was too uneasy in herself in front of Miss Betsy, and too subdued, meaning too constrained or restrained, and too bewildered altogether. She was so confused by all of these things happening to observe anything very clearly or to know what to say. So the mother didn't respond to all of Miss Betsy's aspirations. She just sat there. "And was David good to you, child?" asked Miss Betsy, when she had been silent for a little while, and these motions of her head had gradually ceased. "Were you comfortable together? Were you very happy?" "We were very happy," said my mother. "Mr. Copperfield was only too good to me." "What? He spoiled you, I suppose," returned Miss Betsy. Maybe you don't know that word, spoiled. They've got it spelled a little bit differently here. They're using a T. They're saying spoilt, but it's the same. It's the same word. Okay. Spoiled means no good. So if you have some food, maybe some chicken sitting out on the table, or some milk, if it sits for too long unrefrigerated, if you don't eat it, over time it will be no good. You can't eat it anymore. And that would be spoiled food. When you have spoiled food, it's food that has gone past its time. It's no good anymore. You can't eat it. If you raise a child and you never say no to that child, they never hear the word no, they always hear the word yes, then probably they will not be very good adults. It would be very hard to make them into good adults if they never hear the word no, because then when they're adults and people say no, they go crazy. So a spoiled child is a ruined child, a no good child. Not because of anything the child did, but it's probably the parents' fault. They never said no. They never corrected the child. The child became spoiled, no good anymore. Sometimes you could use spoil in a good way. And like if you go to a spa and you get a massage and they put the cucumbers on your eyes and whatever else they do to you, they would say, "Oh, you're spoiling yourself. You're giving yourself the most wonderful treatment." So sometimes you could even use spoil in a good way. A spa will tell you to spoil yourself, or they'll say a resort will tell you, "We'll spoil you while you're on vacation," meaning we'll give you everything. We'll never say no to you. So it can be used in fun and positive ways also. So here, Miss Betsy says to the mother, "Oh, what? He spoiled you, I suppose." Is that good or bad? I don't know. But she's saying he gave you everything. He never said no to you, I suppose. Returned Miss Betsy, "For being quite alone and dependent on myself in this rough world again. Yes, I fear he did indeed," sobbed my mother. Let's see. "For being quite alone and dependent on myself in this rough world again. Yes, I fear he did indeed." So she's being sarcastic, saying, yeah, he spoiled me. Look at me. I'm all alone. And I'm in this horrible situation. I'm about to have a baby all alone. Yeah, he spoiled me, sure. Sobbed my mother. Remember, sobbing is is crying, is very strong crying. Well, don't cry, said Miss Betsy. You are not equally matched, child. If any two people can be equally matched. And so I asked the question. You were an orphan, weren't you? Let's see. Again, this is kind of complicated the way it's worded. You were not equally matched, child. If any two people can be equally matched. So she's saying you marrying my nephew was not a good match. It was not equal. So he was here and you were here. So only we just know from age that he was 40 and she was 20. So she could be talking about that, but she might be talking about something else too. You were not equally matched, child. If any two people can be equally matched. So she's saying you weren't equally matched, but I don't know if it's ever possible to equally match people. And so I asked the question. You were an orphan, weren't you? Yes. And a governess? I was a nursery governess in a family where Mr. Copperfield came to visit. So she was like a nurse for the babies of a friend of Mr. Copperfield. Mr. Copperfield was very kind to me and took a great deal of notice of me and paid me a good deal of attention, and at last proposed to me, and I accepted him. And so you were married, said my mother simply. And so we were married, said my mother simply. Ha! Poor baby, mused Miss Betsy, with her frown still bent upon her face. Now this word muse, let's put that up on the screen. To muse. This is not the same as amuse, which means to have fun. But to muse means to think, to consider, to imagine. So here in this line, ha, poor baby. She's thinking about this situation in her head. She's imagining the whole thing in her head. That's why it's mused Miss Betsy with her frown bent on the fire. Poor baby. And she's thinking about all of the things. She's musing over all of the things that must have transpired between her and her nephew. Do you know anything? I beg your pardon, ma'am? Faltered my mother. To falter means to stop. So when he says faltered my mother, the mother is, what? Do you know anything? I beg your pardon? What? Faltered, stopped, paused. About keeping house, for instance. So keeping house means cleaning, buying groceries. If you have servants, how to manage the servants. That's keeping house. Not much, I fear, returned my mother. Not so much as I could wish, but Mr. Copperfield was teaching me. Much he knew about it himself, said Miss Betsy, in a parenthesis. Okay, that's kind of funny. I guess they're doing that on purpose. I don't know. And I should have improved, being very anxious to learn, and he very patient to teach. If the great misfortune of his death, my mother broke down again here, and could not go farther. And I hope I should have improved, being very anxious to learn, and he very patient to teach. If the great misfortune of his death, and then she started crying again, and couldn't talk any more. Well, well, said Miss Betsy. I kept my housekeeping book regularly and balanced it with Mr. Copperfield every night. Okay, so Miss Betsy says, well, well. And then the mother says, I kept my housekeeping book. So she had a book, and every time she bought something for the house, food or wine or any kind of expense for the house, she would keep it in the book, because that's what Mr. Copperfield was teaching her, how to keep the accounts of the house. Let's see. I kept my housekeeping book regularly and balanced it with Mr. Copperfield every night. So to balance it means how much did I spend and how much money do I have. That's balancing a book to keep track to see if you're spending too much or not enough. Cried my mother in another burst of distress and breaking down again. To break down. See, again, these phrasal verbs, they always have more than one meaning because you probably have seen this word breakdown, this phrasal verb breakdown, meaning something mechanical doesn't work anymore. My computer broke down, my car broke down. It's very possible that you've seen that. But here, breaking down means crying so much you can't do anything else. You can't talk, you can't think, you're just crying. So if you break down emotionally, you're in a very bad position emotionally, and you can't do anything else but go crazy, basically. Maybe you've heard that expression, a nervous breakdown. So your nerves are attacking you so much that you go crazy and you can't really accomplish anything else. So she says, I kept my housekeeping book regularly and balanced it with Mr. Copperfield every night, cried my mother, in another outburst of distress, and breaking down again. Well, well, said Miss Betsy, don't cry any more. And I'm sure we never had a word of difference respecting it, except when Mr. Copperfield objected to my 3s and 5s being too much like each other, or to my putting curly tails on the ends of my 7s and 9s. So the only time that Mr. Copperfield ever criticized her was because her 5s and her 3s looked too similar, and she put little embellishments, little decorations on her numbers. Resumed my mother in another burst, and breaking down again. You'll have to make yourself ill, said Miss Betsy. Why would she say that? You'll have to make yourself ill. Oh, you'll make yourself ill. You'll make yourself sick from all this crying, said Miss Betsy. And that will not be good either for you or for my goddaughter. Come, you mustn't do it. This argument had some share in quieting my mother, though her increasing indisposition perhaps had a larger one. This argument had some share in quieting my mother. So Miss Betsy's arguing with her and telling her, stop this, you're going to get sick and you're going to make the baby sick, it had an effect. It calmed her down a little bit. Though her increasing indisposition perhaps had a larger one. So indisposition, meaning it's like kind of a polite way of saying anger. So her words were working; they were helping her, but more was her force, her rudeness, made her so uncomfortable that it kind of calmed her down. There was an interval of silence, only broken by Miss Betsy's occasionally ejaculating "Ha!" as she sat with her feet upon the fender. David had bought an annuity for himself with his money, I know, said she, by and by. But what did he do for you? Now we've got that word by and by, which I think earlier I told you means later. But what does it mean here? David had bought an annuity for himself. An annuity is when you get paid every year something. So maybe he made some kind of investment where he paid a company and the company agreed, okay, every year we'll pay you this much money, and that's an annuity. So instead of having his money just sit somewhere, it's sitting with an investment company, and each year it pays something for him to live off of. So David had bought an annuity for himself with his money, I know, said she, by and by. What did he do for you? This by and by, I don't know how to... It's kind of like anyway here. David had bought an annuity for himself with his money, I know, said she by and by. I think maybe the best way to think of it is like anyway. What did he do for you? Mr. Copperfield, said my mother, answering with some difficulty, was so considerate and good as to secure a reversion of part of it to me. So he made sure that she would get part of this annuity. How much? Asked Betsy. £105 a year, said my mother. He might have done worse, said my aunt. So apparently that's not too bad for 1840, £100 a year. Because the aunt says, well, it's not too bad, it could be worse. The word was appropriate to the moment. My mother was so much worse that Peggotty, coming in with the tea-board and candles, and seeing at a glance how ill she was, as Miss Betsy might have done sooner, if there had been light enough, conveyed her upstairs to her own room with all speed, and immediately dispatched Ham Peggotty, her nephew, who had been for some days past secreted in a house unknown to my mother, as a special messenger in the case of an emergency, to fetch the nurse and doctor. Oh boy, okay, this is a little bit long. I'm just going to take a break, and I will be back in just a minute. Okay, we're back. That's the wrong music. I don't know why I keep switching to this. Let me find my... Let's see. Okay, that's the wrong music for this. Here we go. Okay. Back to the serious story of David Copperfield. All right. So the word was appropriate to the moment. My mother was so much worse that Peggotty, coming in with the tea-board and candles, and seeing at a glance how ill she was, as Miss Betsy might have done sooner if there had been light enough. So when Peggotty came in with the tea, she also had candles, which gave more light to the room. And suddenly you could see the mother's face very clearly. She looked very sick. And the aunt probably would have noticed, but it was so dark in the room until Peggotty came with the candles that she didn't see it. So let's see, they conveyed her upstairs. That's a fancy word for they moved her upstairs to her own room with all speed, and immediately dispatched Ham Peggotty. So dispatch means like to call for someone, to send for someone. So they dispatched Ham Peggotty, that's Peggotty's nephew, who had been for some days past secreted in the house. So Peggotty had called her nephew. She didn't tell the mother a few days ago, and she said, you stay here with us because Oh, someday soon the baby's coming and we'll need you to go get the doctor. So, unknown to my mother, a special messenger in case of an emergency to fetch the nurse and doctor. To fetch means go and get something, to go and bring something. So the Peggotty asked her nephew to come and stay at the house, so that when the time came, he could run and fetch. He could go and get and bring back the nurse and doctor. Those allied powers were considerably astonished when they arrived within a few minutes of each other to find an unknown lady of portentous appearance sitting before the fire with her bonnet tied over her left arm, stopping her ears with jeweler's cotton. Okay, so the allied powers. Ally, means people working together. And so I guess those allied powers means the doctor and the nurse were considerably astonished. They were very surprised when they arrived within a few minutes of each other. So the doctor and the nurse arrived at almost the same time, which surprised them. What surprised them was to find a portentous appearance sitting before the fire. Now that word portentous, that's a kind of a fancy word here. Let's say it means impressive in a bad way. But it's not a word that I think you have to know. I've never used that word in my life. Portentous. A lady of portentous appearance, looking very important. Sitting before the fire with her bonnet. A bonnet is a hat. But this bonnet was tied to her arm and stopping her ears with jeweler's cotton. I don't know. Peggotty, knowing nothing about her, and my mother saying nothing about her, she was quite a mystery in the parlor, and the fact of her having a magazine of jeweler's cotton in her pocket and sticking the article in her ears in that way, not to detract from the solemnity of her presence. So Peggotty doesn't understand it either. She's got some cotton and she's putting it in her ears, maybe cleaning her ears, and the servant doesn't know who she is, it's a strange appearance, but yet she looks very regal and dignified. The doctor, having been upstairs and coming down again, and having satisfied himself, I suppose, that there was a probability of this unknown lady and himself having to sit there face to face for some hours, laid himself out to be polite and social. So the doctor didn't know who she was, but he understood that this could take several hours before the baby's ready to come. So they're probably going to be sitting in that room together for several hours. So he tried to be very friendly to her, realizing that they would spend all this time together. He was the meekest of his sex. Now earlier they used that word meek. Remember that it's kind of like a combination of shy and weak and gentle. It's not a bad thing to be meek. But when they say he was the meekest of his sex, so he was a man, but he wasn't a big, strong, intimidating, scary man. He was kind of maybe a small, quiet little man. The next line, the mildest of little men. Mild means like gentle. So he was the meekest of his sex, the mildest of little men. So he was not a very intimidating person, very quiet, very gentle person. He sidled in and out of the room to take up the less space. So he sometimes would go in the room and sometimes out of the room because he didn't like to take up space in the room. He walked as softly as the ghost in Hamlet, and more slowly. He carried his head on one side, partly in modest deprecation, so down, so his head was like this, of himself, and partly in modest propitiation of everybody else. So his mannerism was kind of like this, down and to the side, to show respect for other people, but also to show that he was a very humble person. It's nothing to say that he hadn't a word to throw at a dog. Okay, it's nothing to say that he hadn't a word to throw at a dog. So, wait, he couldn't have thrown a word at a mad dog. He might have offered him one gently, or half of one, or a fragment, for he spoke as slowly as he walked. So they're saying he's such a quiet person, he wouldn't even talk to a dog. He might have offered him one. Let's see. He couldn't have thrown a word at a mad dog. You know, I guess this expression he couldn't have thrown a word at a dog is probably maybe something that they would have said 150 years ago. Certainly not something I've ever heard now. I can imagine what it means, but I think there's kind of a joke going here, but I don't fully understand it, maybe because this is so old. But he couldn't have thrown a word at a mad dog. Like, maybe if you had like a crazy dog, you would say, go away, but he would never do that. He might have offered him one gently. So that's showing, so you've got a crazy, vicious dog, but the only thing that could come out of his mouth would be some gentle words, or a fragment of one. Not even a complete word, maybe just a little word, because he's so quiet and gentle. For he spoke as slowly as he walked. But he wouldn't have been rude to him, and he couldn't have been quick with him for any earthly consideration. So even at a crazy, vicious, mean, ready-to-attack dog, he couldn't have been rude to him. He couldn't have said anything bad to that dog. And he couldn't have said anything that he didn't think out very well. So he's quite a character. Mr. Chillip, looking mildly at my aunt with his head on one side and making a little bow, said in an allusion to the jeweler's cotton as he softly touched his left ear, "Some local irritation, ma'am?" So he's wondering, why is she doing that? Local irritation. Is there some little spot bothering her? What? replied my aunt, pulling the cotton out of one ear like a cork. What? Mr. Chillip was so alarmed by her abruptness, as he told my mother afterwards, that it was a mercy he didn't lose his presence of mind, but he repeated sweetly, "Some local irritation, ma'am?" "Nonsense," replied my aunt, and corked herself again at one blow. So she didn't even, she just put the cotton back in her ear. Mr. Chillip could do nothing after this but sit and look at her feebly. Feeble is a word that means weak. Remember, we use that word meek, which is kind of like weak. Meek isn't, weak is kind of a negative word, but meek is not a negative word. But feeble means weak, and this is another way to describe him. He's weak. He's feeble, very quiet, very gentle. He just looked at her feebly. I don't know how that would look, but something like that. As she sat and looked at the fire until he was called upstairs again. After some quarter of an hour's absence, he returned. "Well?" said my aunt, taking the cotton out of her ear nearest to him. "Well, ma'am," returned Mr. Chillip, we are progressing slowly, ma'am." "Bah!" said my aunt with a perfect shake on the contemptuous interjection, and corked herself as before. So she said, "Well?" He said, "Oh, it's happening slowly." Bah! And she put the cotton back in her ear. Maybe I should mention the word cork. Cork, if you don't know, is this material here. Let's see. So this is, this is something that you put in a bottle, like a wine bottle, but especially back then, it could be maybe any kind of bottle. That's how you would seal the bottle, is you would put cork in it. So to cork something is to stick something in very, very quickly, very insensitively. So when he says she corked herself, she put the cotton back in. Really, really, as Mr. Chillip told my mother, he was almost shocked. Speaking in a professional point of view alone, he was almost shocked. But he sat and looked at her, notwithstanding, for nearly 2 hours as she sat looking at the fire, until he was again called out. After another absence, he again returned. Well, said my aunt, taking the cotton on that side. So she's got, well? Well, ma'am, returned Mr. Chillip, we are progressing slowly, ma'am. Yeah, said my aunt, with such a snarl. This is a snarl. Yeah, it's like a mean look. Let's see, what happens if we find a snarl here? What do we get? Snarl. Oh, here's a snarl. That's a snarl. This guy. Wait a minute. There's a snarl. A snarl. A snarl. So yeah, my aunt said with such a snarl at him, so she snarled at him, that Mr. Chillip absolutely could not bear it. He could not bear something means that you can tolerate it, that you can deal with it, but he could not bear it. He could not tolerate it. It was really calculated to break his spirit, he said afterwards. So she knew what she was doing. She was intimidating him, being mean to him on purpose. Maybe because she enjoyed the reaction. He preferred to go and sit upon the stairs in the dark and the strong draught until he was again sent for. So draught is like a strong wind. And if a house has a draught, that you could feel like the wind. Do you ever feel that, like in an old house? The wind moving through it, that's a draft. So he preferred to sit on the stairs in the dark and the strong draft until he was again sent for. Ham Peggotty, who went to the national school and was a very dragon at his catechism, and who may therefore be regarded as a credible witness. Catechism is kind of I don't know if it's just a Catholic thing. Catechism. Oh, it could be. I know it from the Catholic Church. Wait, see, is catechism only for Catholic? Well, okay, it could be for a couple of different religions, I guess. But it's like the religious teaching of especially of like a book. So he was a very dragon at his catechism. So he took his religious learning very seriously, and who may therefore be regarded as a credible witness. So he would never lie. He always tells the truth because he takes his religion very seriously. Reported the next day that happening to peep in at the parlor. And who may therefore be regarded as a credible witness, reported next day that happening to peep in at the parlor door an hour after this, he instantly described by Miss Betsy, then walking to and fro in a state of agitation, and pounced upon before he could make his escape. Wait a minute. There's a lot going on in this sentence. Okay, so Ham, Peggotty's nephew, who you have to believe because he takes his religion very seriously, he would never tell a lie, happened to peep in at the parlor door. So to peeping is like looking, but peeping is kind of like, looking like this. So he wasn't supposed to be watching, but he happened to see a little bit. He peeped in at the parlor door an hour after this, and he was instantly decried by Miss Betsy. So when you decry something, you say, "What are you doing?" Then walking to and fro. Walking to and fro means like walking this way and then walking that way and then going back and forth from one direction to the other. That's walking to and fro. In a state of agitation. Agitation means like nervous energy. Like it could be anger. It could be any kind of nervous feeling. Any kind of high, tense, nervous feeling. And pounced upon before he could make his escape. So pouncing is like jumping, like an animal attacking. So it's not clear who he's talking about here. Is he talking about the doctor or himself? Did Miss Betsy pounce upon him? Did she attack him? Or did she attack the doctor? That there were now occasional sounds of feet and voices overhead, which he inferred the cotton did not exclude. So Ham, the nephew, I guess Miss Betsy noticed him peeping in, and she went after him. She said, "Hey, you!" But using this pounce, it sounds like an animal attacking an innocent animal, a vicious animal attacking an innocent animal. Because even she could hear, even through her cotton, she could hear a lot of activity upstairs. Okay, from the circumstance of his evidently being clutched, that's like grabbing, clutched by the lady as a victim on whom to expand her superabundant agitation when the sounds were loudest. So Miss Betsy grabbed him, that marching him constantly up and down by the collar, as if he had been taking too much laudanum. What is laudanum? Laudanum. An alcoholic solution containing morphine prepared from opium. So she was dragging him back and forth as if he were on drugs. That's my interpretation. I don't know if that's really what he's saying, but that's. Let me fix my camera here. Just a second. Okay. All right. So she was dragging him by the collar as if he were on some kind of drug. She was moving him around. So at those times shook him, rumpled his hair, made light of his linen. To me, that means like she was joking about it, like she was ridiculing his clothes. Like, what is this shirt? I don't know if that's what he means, but that's how I interpret it. Stopped his ears as if she confounded them with her own, and otherwise tuzzled and maltreated him. Oh, so she was really abusing this poor nephew. This in part confirmed by his aunt, who saw him at 12:30 soon after his release, and affirmed that he was then as red as I was. So she was like physically abusing him. The mild Mr. Chillip could not possibly bear malice at such a time, if at any time. Malice means a feeling of doing bad. So the mild Mr. Chillip, mild, again, that means like gentle or soft, could not possibly bear malice at such a time, if at any. So I guess that means that he forgave her, or he didn't feel bad. He didn't feel bad things about. He didn't think bad things about her even after she did those things. He sidled into the parlor as soon as he was at liberty, and said to my aunt in his meekest manner, "Well, ma'am, I'm happy to congratulate you." "What upon?" said my aunt sharply. Mr. Chillip was fluttered again by the extreme severity of my aunt's manner. So he made her little bow and gave her a little smile to mollify her. I mean, there's some words in here I'm sure you don't know, but they're not exactly words that you need to know that you'll ever use. So let's just keep going until we find something more useful. "Mercy on the man, what's he doing?" cried my aunt impatiently. "Can't he speak?" "Be calm, my dear ma'am," said Mr. Chillip in his softest accents. "There's no longer any occasion for uneasiness, ma'am. Be calm." So he's saying, stop it. There's no more reason to be excited. Everything's finished. Calm down. It has since been considered almost a miracle that my aunt didn't shake him and shake what he had to say out of him. So shake him. Tell me what's going on. Shake it out of him. But in any way, that made him quail. She only shook her head at him, but in any way, that made him quail. Well, I don't know what that word quail means. Quail. Well, I mean, I know that it's a bird, and that's what Google is telling me, but seems like a verb here, to quail. Let's see. No, Google doesn't even give me anything for that. I'm not really sure what's meant by this. But I do know that the word quail means bird. It's a type of bird, but I don't think that's how it's being used here. Oh well. We don't have to worry too much about that word. "Well, ma'am," resumed Mr. Chillip, as soon as he had the courage, "I am happy to congratulate you. All is now over, ma'am, and well over." During the 5 minutes or so that Mr. Chillip devoted to the delivery of his oration, my aunt eyed him narrowly. So these would be big eyes, but narrow eyes. Like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What are you getting at? She eyed him narrowly, like she's suspicious. "How is she?" said my aunt, folding her arms with her bonnet still tied to one of them. "Well, ma'am." "She will soon be quite comfortable, I hope," returned Mr. Chillip. "Quite as comfortable as we can expect a young mother to be under these melancholy wait, is that domestic? I don't know if that's a C. Probably it's a C. It should be a C. Oh, let's say it's domestic. Funnier if it's domestio, but I don't think it is. Domestic circumstances. There cannot be any objection to your seeing her presently, ma'am. May do her good." "And she, how is she?" said my aunt sharply. Mr. Chillip laid his head a little more on one side and looked at my aunt like an amiable bird, like a friendly bird. Amiable means friendly. "The baby," said my aunt. "How is she?" "Ma'am," returned Mr. Chillip, "I apprehended you had known it's a boy." My aunt never said a word, but looked at her bonnet by the strings in the manner of a sling, aimed a blow at Mr. Chillip's head with it, put it on bent, so she tried to hit him with her bonnet, then put it on her head, and walked out and never came back. She vanished like a discontented fairy. So discontented means unhappy or angry, and a fairy is a magical creature. But you don't want to make these little magical creatures angry. You wouldn't want them to be your enemy. Or like one of those supernatural beings whom it was popularly supposed I was entitled to see, and never came back again. No, I lay in my basket, and my mother lay in her bed. Betsy Trotwood Copperfield was forever in the land of dreams and shadows, the tremendous region whence I had so lately travelled. And the light upon the window of our room shone out upon the earthly bourne of all such travellers, and the mound above the ashes and the dust that once he, without whom I had never been. Oh gosh, what was that last part? And the light upon the window of our room shone out upon the earthly bourne of all such travellers, and the mound above the ashes, and the dust that once was he, without whom I had never been. Oh, I really don't even understand that last paragraph, to be honest with you. Okay, well, this is the end of chapter 1, and I'm going to take some of these more interesting words and make some little exercises with them, and then we can practice them a little bit more, and we will continue next time with chapter 2.